going
How are
on?
you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm doing quite well. Cannot complain.
Good, good. Where are you located?
I am here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, Atlanta, Georgia. Nice, very nice. My stepdaughter just went down there. She went over spring break about 3 weeks ago, and they had a good time down there.
Yeah,
Which,
it's a cool city. I like it.
yeah, yeah, right on. Well, hey, man, it's great to meet you. I appreciate you taking time out. And the first thing that I want to address before we get into your life and your work and what makes you who you are is COVID's been quite a thing. It's worked on all of us in different ways. How did you survive it, and how has it changed the way that you conduct business and even live your life now?
So it's a funny story with that. Because I've got a little bit of a track record that's starting here, and it's not the right kind of track record. So I have to fast forward back to our last kind of big recession time, 2007, 2008, right? And it really all hit in September 2008. And that was the same month that we basically relaunched or founded the first company that I ran. It was a 21 something like that. And so the next 6 months, stock markets dropped 35, 40%. And that was the context for us trying to start a business. Fortunately, we did a couple things right. We did a lot of things wrong, but that worked out really, really well. It's a wonderful story. We could talk about that later. But come 2019, 2020, I'm thinking about like what's the next thing, what's the next new adventure. And so January 1 I launch what is now the Scale Architects program, helping companies and leaders to scale themselves in their business. And lo and behold, the first 3 months COVID hits, and we're back in it again. So I'll answer your question here in a second, but the first thing is, if I ever start another business, I'll be sure to let you know. We'll short everything and we'll make a lot of money. It'll be great.
There you go.
But yeah, so I think it's an interesting thing in my world. So much of the response to COVID was like it was just a completely new season in my life. I went from leading a company with about 80 employees to being a solopreneur, working from home, and there was a lot of things that are mixed into that, and so I don't know that I have a great example of like what part of that was COVID and what wasn't. I know that what it forced me and the other folks I was working with in our industry to do is to embrace a much more virtual approach to work, right? Both in the way that we help clients directly and in helping our clients, businesses, nonprofits, and how they can approach it as well. And that continues to be a huge challenge, right? When you're looking at hybrid work environments, no one has that quite figured out yet. And so there's just an added level of uncertainty that's come with it. I think, the last little bit to answer what was a relatively simple question is, I think the uncertainty that showed up in the COVID pandemic and after, I think it really woke me up to how little I actually control, right? And how much I have to approach my work and my world with open hands. You try and hang on to it too tightly and it just gets taken away.
So, as a scale architect, let's boil this down to its pieces. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, third graders. One of them looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Yeah. So what do I do? I had the ability to do this because I've got two young boys that have kind of been growing up in this context. And so they ask me questions a lot. One of them, he's now 12, and I think he could teach most of this better than I could at this point. But what do? We help organizations to grow effectively and efficiently. So what happens is the more you grow, the more complex you get. And if you don't deal with the complexity, it gets harder and harder to do what you do on a daily basis. And so fundamentally, at the root of everything that we do, we help leaders to overcome complexity inside of their organization.
So, let's go back to when you were in the third grade. What was your dream growing up?
What was my dream? So it's kind of funny. My dream was actually to be an architect. I
Right
didn't
on.
realize that I would be architecting organizations and doing organizational design. I thought it would be buildings, but I loved like Frank Lloyd Wright and that whole genre of like just really interesting and intriguing architecture. I was a little bit of a nerd, and I would actually draw schematics as like a hobby and thing to do, especially on like long road trips. So yeah.
What's been the structure in the world in your travels that you saw that you literally it blew your mind from an architectural standpoint?
So, I mean, Falling Water has to be one of them. It's a house that Frank Lloyd Wright built for, was it like the Kaufmans, or I can't even remember who it was for,
Yeah.
but it was real close to where I grew up in Pittsburgh. So I had a chance in, I think, fifth or sixth grade to actually go and walk around it. And there's a like a river or a stream that actually flows through the house and comes out of the bottom of the house as a waterfall. It's just like, to do that in a house is stunning. So that's gotta rank as one of the top ones. I'm a big fan of the real tall buildings too. There's always the next tallest one, but I've always been fascinated by that.
I remember going to New York for the first time and being out there in broad daylight and it was dark on streets like that. Because coming from Kansas City where there's not that concrete urban landscape that's that dense, I was like, "Wow, what is this?" It's crazy, you know?
Yeah, it's intense. It's, as much as I like architecture, like, I need a little bit of sky. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
I'm
that
not quite at home in the urban jungle.
yeah, that's New York though. Everything's just kinda just squeezed in together. Um, so let's go back to your childhood. Are you originally from Atlanta?
No, I'm a bit of everything. So, depending on how you answer that question, I was born in California. I grew up around the Pittsburgh area. I actually went to school in your neck of the woods in Grandview, Missouri, at a ministry school there. And then ultimately ended up moving here to Atlanta in '06. So I've lived here longer than anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm a technician in the Grandview School District.
Yeah,
So
fascinating.
I'm right here. So talk to me a little bit about some of the seeds that were planted in you early on that have made you who you are. Your love of architecture, travel. I mean, you've moved around. What are the things that were planted in you early on that have grown into who you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is, I tend to call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I work with lots of entrepreneurs, many of them the kind of stereotypical, like selling candy on the playground. And I didn't. It took me a really long time to realize it, but kind of knit in all of it was just a love of business. And I would never have had the language to articulate that as a kid, but for example, I had an opportunity in school to just do a project, anything you want to do, tell us what it is for a program. And I chose to follow stocks, and I knew nothing about it. I picked three losers, so I'm still no good at it. But there's always kind of a fascination with business in general, right? I love the practicality of it. I love the organizational, how do we get all these things moving together? The other part of it was just that kind of entrepreneurial, like creating something from nothing. My dad was an entrepreneur when I was young. He started his own business. I got to see that, the joys and the pains of that firsthand. And so that was a big component of it as well. And so, kind of where that's coalesced for me, and just making a very long story short, is um let me rewind for a second. So I actually ended up going to ministry school, like I mentioned. I did 2 years at a program there in Kansas City, moved to Atlanta to work with a ministry. And part of that structure of that organization is you raise your own support or you fund yourself, basically. So it was not a paid position. It was a full-time volunteer position, basically. And much like a missionary overseas, we were doing that here in Atlanta. And so I, didn't want to ask people for money. I didn't think that was, what I was supposed to do. And so I went and got a part-time job, and happened to do it with a gentleman who was from the same church. And it wasn't until then that I rediscovered my love for business. I remember I read a book, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, by guy, was it Kiyosaki, or I can't remember his last name. But I remember reading through that. And one point he talks about a bank account balance. It's like $53 million. And like, this is one bank account. And the money thing was fine, but what it did, and I've had a few of these experiences, but it made my world so much bigger than it was. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. It was hard to come up with, enough money to pay the bills this year, let alone have that much left over. And I just realized there's so much more to this world than you're just kind of struggling to get by. The other instance of this was actually the first time I went overseas. My wife is from Norway. And so the very first time I went over to meet her family and spend some time with them, I remember it was the first time I had been out of country to a non-third world country, basically. And just seeing like there's this whole different culture and it's working really well. And it's so different than how I would see, it made my world so much bigger. And I think it was through those things that I really wanted to bring all of that when I founded this company, the bigness of what's possible, right? Our world is so much more than the 3-foot world that we can touch, right? Or the parts of our world that were introduced, and so those have all had, it's a knitting together of kind of all those different things.
So who's been a hero for you in your life? Who's been a role model that's always fueled you to be who you are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of there's so many. I think I've had a luxury of great, what I would call father figures and mentors, starting with my own dad. If I could be half the man that my dad is, I'd be pretty proud. So I just have, loved kind of being in his shadow as a kid, learning from him. We built a house together when I was young. It was a difficult process, probably one that I complained about a lot more than I should have, but I've learned so much from him, and I love him to pieces. And through my relationship with him, I got to get to know several of his friends really well, who also kind of mentored me. I got early jobs that way from folks, and I just got to see men showing up in the real world, and that was just a tremendous thing for me. A few others. One, my relationship with Jesus is very important, so I don't want to gloss over that. It's just been a fundamental part of me and who I am, and I find a lot of peace and strength in Scripture and in Jesus. And more recently, this is a point that I actually talk about a lot, is when I was running the company I started back in 2008 with my business partners called Start Church. We actually helped start churches all across the country, and we kind of had this idea that we were carving territory that no one had ever done before, and we had to figure it all out on our own, right? It was kind of like we don't need all these other people or all this other advice. Like, if we can't figure it out, it can't be done, or whatever it may be. And so we kind of had this. It was a little narcissistic, to be honest, but it was more like, let's just figure this out. Let's figure our way. And it felt like every day we were kind of walking off the face of the map, kind of looking around, drawing what we saw and going to the next one. And there's an excitement to that, until you get lost, right? And we reached this point where, uh, we just didn't know the next step. We had tried every next step that we could think of, and it's a successful business. It was wonderful, but like, it was getting harder and harder and harder and harder. And I mean, it was showing up in our bottom line. It was showing up in our relationships. It was showing up in our employee relations and engagement. And when you have this idea that it's like you're on your own, you've got to figure it out, and you can't figure it out, that's one of the scariest places that I've been in my life. Because you kind of feel locked in, you feel lost. And it was around that time that two kind of new mentors in my life really came into shape. One of them was a gentleman named Les McEwen, and he's now a business partner with me. He created the model that I use and help organizations with. It's called the predictable success model. But that model, his work, his book, I heard about him on a podcast like this, which is why I love doing these podcasts. But it literally changed my life. In a nutshell, from a business standpoint, we tripled our bottom line in a year. We went from losing profitability every single year to, just outrageous profitability in a very, very short period of time. Gave us so much clarity about what all these challenges were that we were having inside of our organization. Gave me confidence back as a leader, just through his book. I hadn't even met him at the time. And ultimately, it was a career decision. Like, I left that business to go help other people achieve that same thing through that same model. So he's been a huge role model for me. I've had the distinct privilege of getting to know him behind the scenes, and he's even more brilliant than he is in his books, which is a really cool thing because not everybody is that way. And then the last, I know these have been long answers to your
Oh,
questions.
it's
I'm
fine.
sorry. But the last one, I can't go without saying, is a gentleman named Robert Mallon. who's really the one that I credit with breaking that myth of, of I have to do it alone. I remember going to him, and I was a little mean to him at first. We were talking about whether or not I should join his coaching group, and I was a little harsh. I can't remember exact words that I say, but the word he used to define me afterwards was intimidating, which got a laugh out of both of us. But ultimately, he really kind of got through those layers for me and helped me to see, I don't have to figure this all out on my own, right? Like, and I don't have to live in that place of isolation and really frustration. And he's just been a hugely instrumental voice in my life for a long time now.
So, what is it that fuels you every day? Every day you wake up, you have things that you want to do and get done. What is the ultimate motivator for you in life?
The biggest thing for me, like I love organizations. It's kind of a weird thing. So to explain this a little bit further, I got to go back to the predictable success model I talked about. There's different stages that organizations, any group of two or more, I actually did a podcast about this as a marriage. So it's this pattern of stages that every group of two or more goes through. And one of those stages in particular is called whitewater. And it's where you've had some success, things were going well, and then it starts to get really, really hard again. It starts to get really complicated again. And it feels like you've lost your grip, right? It feels like you're out of your depth as a leader. As an individual, it can be very disheartening, very disillusioning. It can feel like your organization is dying, your relationship is dying. It just doesn't make sense, because it feels like if we've done all the work to make a successful organization, why doesn't it keep getting more successful? And it's usually this issue of complexity. It's a little weird, but that excites me more than just about anything. Like the idea of helping somebody recognize the role that all this complexity is having inside their organization, and then giving them the clarity of how to get out of it. Right? It's not just, hey, you're here, I'll help you understand where you are on the map. It's also saying, hey, and here's the step to get out. And so for me, what really lights me up is the fact that I get to help either organizations or the people that help organizations. I train other coaches, but help them to create this just fundamental change inside of an organization that benefits everybody. Benefits the founder and owner because they have a more profitable business, benefits the leadership team because they can work together without the painful conflict that you have in Whitewater. And quite honestly, it makes a massive difference for every employee in the organization, because to be part of a well-run, efficient, effective organization, there's so much more joy in that than one that's fighting with itself and not aligned and frustrated. I've been in both, right? I know the feeling of both, and the ability to help people achieve that predictable success, not just for profit or whatever that is, but for the joy of leading and being in an organization that's in that stage. That's what keeps me going.
So, what are you the proudest of all the things that you've done between education and business and geography? What is it that you're the proudest of?
I mean, I have to be proudest of my kids. Like, I don't know how much credit I can take for that, but it's like I have three amazing, amazing kids. We have two biological children, Benjamin and Liam, and we have an adopted, our third child was adopted, Isabel. And watching them at each of their stages, there's about 10 years between them, but watching them kind of, stepping up into a new little version of themselves, it floors me every single time. I mean, it really does. And it's intimidating. It's a little scary, like these are real humans and what am I doing? But those little moments. I remember one time my son Benjamin was on a sports team. He was really struggling with it. Had a couple of kids on the team they were not friends, we'll put it that way, but they're on the same team. And he didn't want to go to the games. It was just a real testing character for him. And at one of these games, they were losing pretty badly. And right before the half, the other team took a shot. It was lacrosse. So the other team took a shot, this big hard rubber ball, and just totally hit the goalie. I mean, he was down, hurt. And I think they were losing like 13-0 or something like it. It was really bad. And Benjamin was on the sideline at the time. Everyone else came off the field because it was halftime, and Benjamin ran across the field to go be with his teammate that was hurt. Like that right there, yeah. I can't come up with anything better. Like that is by far and away one of my proudest moments.
Yeah, that's the essence. So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, you ran into the 20-year-old version of yourself, and based on the wisdom you've gained in your life, what advice would you give your younger version?
It's got to be alone takes a long time. You know, I experienced a lot in a relatively compressed career, right? I've helped start 20,000 organizations, and I've just had an opportunity to do a lot of stuff. And it, you know, for some people, it's like, man, you had all of that. You've been moving at the speed of light. You know, it's kind of what it looks like from the outside. From the inside, I've always had this torment of like, it's got to be faster. It's got to be faster. My young dumb self, you know. But looking back to being 20, I think it would be that. It would be to surround myself with more peers and mentors and folks who haven't necessarily been down that road before, because no one's been down the exact same road, but who can walk that road with me. I undervalued that for a very long time.
So everyone in your life has a perception of you, whether it's your family, your friends, clients, colleagues, all these people in your world, but you're in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
What's my perception of me? I am someone, especially if you kind of match it up against the perception that other people have. I'm someone who cares a lot more than I let on. I'm a lot more committed to the success of the people around me than I have the ability to articulate clearly. So I would say that's one of the areas where it doesn't resonate as much. Another one, and I would say I'm more proud of this, and this goes back to your original question around COVID, actually. Um, I had taken some time, and my wife and I had gone through and kind of listed out our values. And to this day, I still couldn't tell you what they are, but that's part of the story. And I remember going through that exercise before COVID happened. COVID happened, business career change, just a lot of change in my life. And I came back to that list of values, and I was a little like ashamed, embarrassed of like, I just had a list of values. I couldn't tell you what they are. And again, it's kind of still true now, but I was really, really proud when I looked back over the big decisions I had made over the previous 6 months or a year and saw that they did align with those things that I said I valued. And that was something that was really encouraging to me. And I don't know that I would have had the guts to kind of say that in an environment like this, except that just to be able to see, you know, hey, those are values, and I did stick to those values, I think is a testimony and a testament to really how I try to orient my life.
So, as someone that's kind of bounced around the country, have you gotten really comfortable with boiled peanuts?
I hate boiled peanuts.
Isn't that weird?
Oh, they're so gross. There's like cardboard.
Uh,
No, I can't do it at all.
I came from Florida back to Kansas City years ago, and somebody had said something about it, or maybe I saw it in a convenience store. I'm like, "What's going on here?" Because when you come from the Midwest, if you get peanuts wet, no one wants them. You go down south, it's a delicacy.
Bold. We call them bold. It's not boiled, it's bold. Bold peanuts.
I had to know. I just did. So, if anyone out there wants to know more about you, anything pertaining to your business, your life, where can they go?
Yeah, scalearchitects.com is the best place to do it. It is jam-packed with free resources. We've got, you know, ebooks and assessments and articles and the podcast, Secret to the High Demand Coach. It's all there. It's the best place to start. If you want to look for me, this is another one of those slightly more complicated questions. I'm a junior. I'm Scott Ritzheimer Jr. So if you look up Scott Ritzheimer on social media, you might find my dad. You might find me. Look for the one who looks like he's, you know, about 21, and you'll probably find me. Let's put it that way.
Right on. Well, hey, stay away from those peanuts. Just stick with the dry, salted kind. Hey, Scott, this has been great, man. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything.
All right, Joe. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.